You know how it feels when winter wraps its icy fingers around your little cabin deep in the woods? The kind of quiet where the only sounds are the crackling fire and the occasional creak of timber settling under the weight of snow. That's exactly where I was. Safe, warm, and utterly alone. Well, at least until she appeared. It wasn't just any ordinary evening. It had been snowing heavily for days, and the world outside my window looked like something out of a postcard. Pristine white blankets covering every tree branch, the ground glistening under the moonlight. I'd spent most of the day chopping wood, making sure I had enough fuel to keep the fire roaring through the night. As I sat by the hearth with a steaming mug of tea, I thought about how lucky I was to live here, to escape the chaos of city life and find solace in nature. But little did I know, fate had other plans for me that night. Around midnight, just as I was about to head upstairs to bed, I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the front door. At first, I assumed it was the wind rattling the old wooden planks. But then came the unmistakable thud of something heavy leaning against the door. My heart skipped a beat. Now let me pause here for a moment, because if you've ever lived in the wilderness, you'll understand why this situation felt so surreal. Bears aren't exactly strangers to these parts. They roam freely during spring and summer, scavenging for berries and fish. But winter is different. This is their hibernation season. They're supposed to be tucked away in dens, sleeping peacefully until warmer weather returns. So hearing what sounded like a bear knocking at my door in the middle of December made absolutely no sense. Curiosity got the better of me, though. Grabbing the flashlight I always kept nearby, I tiptoed toward the entrance. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. I cracked the door open just wide enough to peek outside, and froze. Standing there, barely 3 feet away, was a mother bear. She was enormous, her shaggy coat dusted with fresh powder, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, filled with desperation rather than aggression. Behind her, partially hidden by her massive frame, were 2 small cubs. They were trembling violently, their tiny bodies frail and weak. In that instant, everything changed. All the survival instincts screaming, "Close the door," were drowned out by one overwhelming realization. She wasn't here to hurt me. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. The cubs looked half-starved, their ribs visible beneath their patchy fur. Their paws were raw and bloody from trudging through the snow. Whatever den they'd once called home must have collapsed or been disturbed, forcing them to venture out into the unforgiving cold. And now, here they were, standing at my doorstep, trusting me not to turn them away. Let me ask you something. Have you ever faced a decision so monumental that it felt like time itself slowed down? That's what happened next. Part of me, the rational part, was screaming that letting a wild animal into my home was madness. Bears are unpredictable creatures, even under normal circumstances. Bringing a mother bear and her cubs inside could easily end in disaster. Yet another part of me, the compassionate, perhaps foolish part, couldn't ignore the sight before me. These weren't monsters. They were survivors. Survivors who needed help. So I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and opened the door wider. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped aside and gestured for them to come in. The mother bear hesitated for a moment, her ears twitching as she scanned the room. Then, with painstaking care, she lumbered forward, her cubs trailing close behind her. Watching them cross the threshold felt like witnessing something sacred, as if the boundary between human and animal had dissolved in that single moment. Once inside, The mother bear immediately sought refuge in the farthest corner of the living room, away from the fireplace. She curled up protectively around her cubs, shielding them with her body. Despite the dire circumstances, there was a strange beauty in the scene. It reminded me of countless nights spent reading stories about humans coexisting with wildlife, tales of mutual respect and understanding. Except this wasn't a story. It was real, happening right in front of me. The warmth of the cabin seemed to revive them slightly. The cubs stopped trembling, and the mother bear let out a soft sigh, her muscles relaxing ever so slightly. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all teetering on the edge of catastrophe. One wrong move, one misinterpretation of intent, and things could spiral out of control. As I stood there, watching them settle in, I noticed details I hadn't seen before. The mother bear's fur was matted and tangled, likely from weeks of struggling to survive. Her claws were worn down, evidence of clawing through ice and snow to find food. The cubs, though small, bore signs of resilience too. Their noses twitched constantly, scanning for scents. Their tiny ears perked up even as exhaustion weighed them down. It struck me then. These animals weren't just victims of circumstance. They were fighters, determined to survive against all odds. Their presence awakened memories I'd long buried. Growing up in a bustling city, I rarely interacted with wildlife beyond the occasional squirrel darting across a park path. My connection to nature was tenuous at best, filtered through books and documentaries. But when I moved to this remote cabin 5 years ago, seeking solitude after a painful divorce, I began to see the natural world in a new light. Every sunrise, every rustle of leaves, every bird call became a reminder of life's fragility and beauty. Now, standing face to face with a starving bear family, I realized that my journey into the wilderness had prepared me for this moment, not just physically, but emotionally. That first night was intense, to say the least. I didn't dare move too quickly or make sudden noises. Every action I took was deliberate, calculated to avoid startling her. After closing the door and locking it securely, just in case, I grabbed a few extra blankets from the closet. Moving quietly, I spread them over the floor near the bears, creating a makeshift nest. The mother bear watched me intently, but didn't react aggressively. If anything, she seemed grateful. Next, I turned my attention to food. Living off-grid means I don't have the luxury of running to the store whenever supplies run low. Still, I managed to scrounge together a decent meal, leftover oatmeal mixed with honey, some canned tuna, and even a jar of peanut butter I'd been saving for emergencies. I placed the offerings on a large tray and slid it carefully across the floor towards her. She sniffed the food cautiously, her nose twitching as she examined each item. When she finally began eating, relief washed over me. For the cubs, I crushed up a few energy bars and sprinkled them onto the floor. One of the cubs, emboldened by hunger, crawled closer to investigate. Its movements were clumsy, almost adorable, but also heartbreaking. You could see how exhausted they all were, how close to giving up. As the hours ticked by, I stayed awake, watching over them. Sleep wasn't an option. Not with a bear family camped out in my living room. Instead, I found myself reflecting on the absurdity of the situation. Who does this? Who invites a wild animal into their home without hesitation? But as crazy as it seemed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I sat cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sipping lukewarm tea. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Every now and then, The mother bear would glance up at me, her expression unreadable. Was she judging me? Grateful? Wary? I couldn't tell. But those glances kept me grounded, reminding me of the responsibility I'd taken on. At one point, the smaller of the two cubs stumbled over to me. Its movements were unsteady, its legs wobbling like a newborn fawn's. It nudged my knee with its snout, and instinctively, I reached out to pet it. My hand hovered in the air for a split second. I knew I should be cautious, but the cub leaned into the touch, emitting a soft whimper that melted my heart. The mother bear watched silently, her gaze unwavering. She didn't intervene, which I took as permission to continue. For the rest of the night, I alternated between stroking the cub's fur and keeping a vigilant eye on the others. The silence of the cabin was broken only by the rhythmic breathing of the bears and the occasional pop of the fire. Outside, the wind howled, battering the walls with gusts of icy air. Inside, however, there was a strange sense of peace. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring us together, three species bound by nothing more than shared vulnerability. When dawn broke, bathing the room in soft golden light, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The mother bear stirred, stretching her limbs and checking on her cubs. They appeared marginally stronger, though still far from healthy. I decided to risk getting closer this time, bringing more food and water. To my surprise, she allowed me to approach within arm's reach. There was no growl, no sign of hostility, only wary curiosity. One of the cubs, braver than its sibling, ventured toward me. It sniffed my boot, then nudged my hand with its wet nose. Instinctively, I reached out and gently scratched the top of its head. The cub leaned into the touch, emitting a soft whimper that tugged at my heartstrings. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just helping them survive. I was forming a connection, a bond that transcended species. But as magical as those early hours felt, I knew we weren't out of danger yet. Nature has a way of testing resolve, and our peaceful interlude wouldn't last forever. Later that afternoon, as I stoked the fire to keep the cabin warm, I heard a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. It started as a distant rumble, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. Growls. Deep, guttural growls that echoed through the forest. I rushed to the window and peered outside, clutching the flashlight tightly in my hand. There he was, a massive male bear, his silhouette stark against the snowy backdrop. He was pacing back and forth, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his thick coat. His presence radiated dominance, and it was clear he'd picked up the scent of the mother bear and her cubs. Male bears are notoriously territorial, especially during mating season. If he discovered them inside my cabin, violence was inevitable. Panic surged through me. What could I possibly do to protect them? I wasn't equipped to handle a confrontation with a creature twice my size. Calling animal control was pointless. They were hours away. Trapping him somehow? Impossible. My mind raced with options, none of which seemed viable. Then, as if sensing the impending threat, the mother bear stood up. She positioned herself squarely between the male bear and her cubs, her posture rigid and alert. Her lips curled back, revealing sharp teeth, and she let out a low, commanding roar, a warning that reverberated through the walls of the cabin. For a tense, endless moment, the two bears stared each other down, separated only by the thin barrier of my wooden door. And then, miraculously, the male bear backed off. Without another sound, he turned and disappeared into the forest. Just like that, the danger passed. By morning, the mother bear and her cubs were gone. They left behind paw prints in the snow, leading deeper into the woods. Though I searched for them, I never saw them again, but the memory of that night stayed with me, haunting me in the best possible way. Looking back, I realized that opening my door to a freezing bear taught me more than I ever imagined. It reminded me of the fragility of life, the power of compassion, and the interconnectedness of all living things. Sometimes, taking a leap of faith, even when it seems insane, can lead to moments of pure magic, moments that change you forever. Over the weeks that followed, I often found myself staring out the window, wondering where they were now. Had they found a new den? Were the cubs thriving? Or had they succumbed to the harshness of winter after all? I tried not to dwell on the worst-case scenarios, instead choosing to focus on the miracle of that single night, the night I shared my home with a family of bears. As spring approached, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of green beneath. Birds returned to the trees, filling the air with song. Life carried on, as it always does. But for me, nothing was quite the same. That experience had awakened something in me. A deeper appreciation for the natural world, a heightened awareness of the delicate balance between humans and animals. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd invite a bear into my home, I would have laughed in their face. But now I understand that sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when you least expect them, when you open your heart and your door to the unknown. The ripple effect. That encounter didn't just change me, it changed the way I interacted with the world around me. In the months that followed, I became more attuned to the rhythms of the forest. I started paying closer attention to the tracks left in the mud, the calls of birds overhead, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Each detail felt significant, a reminder of the intricate web of life that surrounded me. I also began to share my story with others, friends, neighbors, even strangers who stopped by my cabin. Some listened with skepticism, others with awe. But regardless of their reactions, I hoped my tale might inspire them to look at the natural world with fresh eyes, to see not just predators and prey, but fellow travelers on this planet. One day, while hiking in the woods, I stumbled upon a clearing where a new den had been dug into the earth. Fresh claw marks marred the bark of nearby trees, and tufts of black fur clung to the branches. My pulse quickened. Could it be them? I wanted to believe it was the same family, the mother bear and her cubs, that had once sought refuge in my home. Even if it wasn't, the possibility filled me with hope. Hope that they had survived, thrived, and found a place to call their own. What struck me most about that experience was how it challenged my assumptions about humanity's role in the natural world. We often think of ourselves as separate from nature, as observers, conquerors, or protectors. But that night, I realized we're simply participants, no better or worse than the bears themselves. Like them, we seek shelter, nourishment, and safety. Like them, we navigate challenges both seen and unseen. And like them, we rely on instinct, intuition, and occasionally acts of kindness to survive. Inviting a bear into my home wasn't just an act of charity, it was an acknowledgement of our shared existence, a recognition that, despite our differences, we are all connected. That realization has stayed with me, shaping the way I live, think, and interact with the world. So, if you ever find yourself faced with an impossible choice, if you're standing at the threshold of fear and compassion, unsure of what to do, I urge you to listen to your heart. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is open your door. The bigger picture. Coexistence in a changing world. This experience also forced me to confront larger questions about humanity's relationship with the environment. Climate change, deforestation, and urban sprawl are pushing wildlife into closer contact with humans than ever before. While some view this as a threat, I've come to see it as an opportunity, an invitation to rethink our priorities and redefine what it means to coexist. For years, I prided myself on being self-sufficient, living off the grid, and minimizing my impact on the land. But sharing my home with a bear family made me realize that true sustainability isn't just about reducing harm. It's about fostering harmony. It's about recognizing that every creature, from the tiniest insect to the largest predator, plays a vital role in maintaining the balance of ecosystems. In the months following their departure, I took steps to make my property more hospitable to wildlife. I planted native berry bushes along the perimeter of my land, installed a bird bath near the edge of the forest, and avoided using pesticides or chemicals that might harm local flora and fauna. These small actions may seem insignificant, but they're part of a larger effort to create a sanctuary, not just for myself, but for the countless creatures who share this space with me. As the seasons changed, memories of that fateful night continue to surface unexpectedly. On particularly quiet evenings, I'd sit by the fire and reflect on the events that unfolded. Sometimes, nostalgia would wash over me, leaving me with a bittersweet longing for the brief time I spent caring for the bears. Other times, I'd feel a surge of gratitude for the lesson they taught me, for the courage they inspired, and for the reminder that kindness knows no boundaries. These reflections often led me to revisit pivotal moments from my own life. I thought about the pain of my divorce, the loneliness that drove me to seek refuge in the wilderness, and the gradual healing process that allowed me to embrace solitude. Opening my door to the bears felt like an extension of that journey, a culmination of lessons learned and growth achieved. I recalled a conversation I once had with my grandfather, a lifelong outdoorsman who instilled in me a love for nature. "Respect the land," he used to say, "and it will respect you." At the time, I didn't fully grasp what he meant, but now, having lived through such a profound experience, I understood. Respect isn't passive, it's active. It's showing up, even when it's inconvenient. It's extending compassion, even when it's risky. And it's acknowledging that we're all part of something greater than ourselves. Years later, I still think about the mother bear and her cubs. Their paw prints may have faded from the snow, but their imprint remains etched in my soul. Whenever I hike through the forest or sit quietly by the stream, I imagine encountering them again, older, wiser, perhaps even accompanied by new cubs. Though unlikely, the possibility brings me comfort. Comfort in knowing that life endures, adapts, and finds a way. Sharing my story has become a form of therapy, a way to process what happened and honor the bear's legacy. People often ask if I regret inviting them into my home. My answer is always the same. How could I regret something that taught me so much? Yes, it was risky. Yes, it was unconventional. But above all, it was transformative. To anyone reading this, I leave you with a challenge. Pay attention. Look beyond your immediate surroundings and notice the subtle wonders of the natural world. Listen to the whispers of the wind, the songs of the birds, the rustle of leaves. And if you ever find yourself standing at the threshold of fear and compassion, remember the bears. Remember that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery are born not from strength, but from vulnerability, from the willingness to open your heart and your door to the unknown. Because in doing so, you might discover that the line between us and them isn't as clear as you thought, and that's a beautiful thing. As the years rolled by, I began to notice patterns in the forest that mirrored my own journey. Each season brought its own challenges and rewards, much like the chapters of my life. Spring was a time of renewal, when the snow melted away to reveal vibrant greens and the chatter of returning birds. Summer buzzed with activity, with bees pollinating flowers and deer grazing in the meadows. Fall painted the landscape in fiery hues, a reminder of the fleeting beauty of life. And winter, though harsh, offered a stark clarity, a time to reflect and prepare for what lay ahead. During one particularly brutal winter, I found myself thinking about the mother bear and her cubs again. How had they fared since that night? Did they find a safe den? Had they learned to adapt to the changing climate, just as I had learned to adapt to the solitude of the wilderness? These questions lingered in my mind, unresolved, but comforting in their mystery. That winter, I decided to document my experiences in a journal, not just the story of the bears, but everything I'd observed and felt since moving to the cabin. Writing became a form of meditation, a way to process the complexities of my emotions and the lessons I'd gleaned from the natural world. Over time, the journal grew into something more, a collection of essays, poems, and sketches that captured the essence of my life in the woods. One entry, written late one night by candlelight, stands out in my memory. Tonight, as the wind howls outside and the fire crackles within, I am reminded of the bears, of the courage it took to open my door, not knowing what lay on the other side. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to act despite it. That night, I chose compassion over caution, trust over suspicion, and in doing so, I discovered a truth that has stayed with me ever since. We are all connected. Every leaf, every stone, every creature shares this fragile, beautiful planet with us. To deny that connection is to deny a part of ourselves. Eventually, I decided to share my writings with the world. At first, it was just a few posts on social media, accompanied by photographs of the forest and sketches of the wildlife I encountered. But as the responses poured in, messages of gratitude, curiosity, and inspiration, I realized that my story had resonated with others. People were hungry for narratives of hope, of kindness, of coexistence. Encouraged by the feedback, I compiled my journal entries into a book titled The Night the Bears Came. It wasn't just about the bears, it was about the lessons they taught me, the connections I forged, and the deeper truths I uncovered about our place in the natural world. The book was published quietly, without much fanfare, but it quickly gained traction among readers who craved stories of authenticity and meaning. Through the book, I connected with conservationists, ecologists, and fellow nature enthusiasts. Together we organize workshops and community events aimed at fostering a greater appreciation for the environment. One project, in particular, stands out. A wildlife sanctuary built on donated land near my cabin. Volunteers worked tirelessly to plant native vegetation, install water sources, and create safe habitats for animals displaced by development. It was a tangible manifestation of the values I'd embraced since that fateful night with the bears. Years after the book's publication, I received a letter that would change my life once again. It was from a wildlife biologist working in the region. She wrote that she had come across a family of bears during her research, a mother and two nearly grown cubs. Based on their behavior and markings, she believed they might be the same bears I had encountered years earlier. My heart raced as I read her words. Could it really be them? The thought filled me with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Excitement at the possibility of seeing them again, and trepidation at the idea of disrupting their lives. After much deliberation, I decided to join the biologist on one of her field expeditions. Armed with binoculars and a camera, I ventured into the forest, retracing the paths I'd walked so many times before. And then, one crisp autumn morning, I saw them. They were farther away than I had hoped, but there was no mistaking them. The mother bear was older now, her coat streaked with silver, but her cubs, now young adults, were thriving. They moved with confidence, their movements fluid and strong. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched them disappear into the trees. Though I never approached them, never attempted to rekindle the connection we had once shared, I felt a profound sense of closure. They were safe, they were free, and in their freedom, I found my own. Today, as I sit by the fire in my cabin, I am reminded of the journey that brought me here. The pain of loss, the joy of discovery, the courage to take risks, all of it has shaped me into the person I am today. The bears may have left my home years ago, but their presence lingers in every corner of my life, in the way I treat others, in the choices I make, in the values I hold dear. If I could go back to that night knowing what I know now, would I do it again? Absolutely. Because in opening my door to a freezing bear and her cubs, I opened my heart to the world. And in doing so, I found a peace that transcends fear, a purpose that sustains me, and a connection that binds us all. So, if you ever find yourself standing at the threshold of fear and compassion, remember this story. Remember the bears, and remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door. The philosophy of interconnectedness. As I delved deeper into the implications of my experience, I began to explore philosophical and spiritual traditions that emphasized interconnectedness. Indigenous teachings, Eastern philosophies, and even modern ecological science all pointed to the same truth. We are not isolated beings, but threads in a vast, intricate tapestry. The bears had shown me this truth in a visceral, undeniable way. One concept that resonated deeply with me was the idea of reciprocity. In many cultures, reciprocity is seen as a fundamental principle of existence, the notion that giving and receiving are two sides of the same coin. By offering shelter to the bears, I had unknowingly entered into a reciprocal relationship with them. They gave me something in return, a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper connection to the natural world, and a profound understanding of the power of compassion. I began to see reciprocity everywhere, in the way plants exchange nutrients through underground fungal networks, in the way rivers carve paths through mountains and nourish entire ecosystems, in the way humans rely on one another for support and companionship. It was a humbling realization, one that encouraged me to live more intentionally and mindfully. Fear played a significant role in my journey with the bears. Initially, it was paralyzing. The fear of the unknown, the fear of danger, the fear of failure. But as the night unfolded, I learned to channel that fear into trust. Trust in the bear's intentions, trust in my own instincts, and trust in the inherent goodness of life. This shift from fear to trust wasn't easy. It required a conscious effort to let go of control and embrace uncertainty. In many ways, it mirrored the broader human struggle to reconcile our primal fears with our higher aspirations. We fear what we don't understand, yet we yearn to connect, to belong, to transcend our limitations. The bears taught me that trust is a choice, a courageous act of faith in the face of doubt. It's a choice that opens doors, literally and metaphorically, and allows us to step into the unknown with grace and humility. As I reflect on the future, I'm filled with both hope and concern. The challenges facing our planet, climate change, habitat destruction, biodiversity loss, are daunting, to say the least. But I believe that stories like mine can serve as reminders of what's possible when we choose compassion over fear, connection over separation. Imagine a world where humans and wildlife coexist harmoniously, where our cities are designed with green spaces and corridors for animals, where technology is used to monitor and protect endangered species, and where education fosters a deep respect for the natural world. It's a lofty vision, but not an impossible one. Every small action we take, planting a tree, supporting conservation efforts, advocating for policy changes, brings us one step closer to that reality. The bears showed me that coexistence isn't just a dream, it's a necessity. They reminded me that we share this planet with countless other beings, each deserving of respect and dignity. And they inspired me to be a steward of the land, a guardian of the wild, and a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. Whether you're reading this for entertainment, inspiration, or insight, I hope you take away one simple message. The world is full of wonder, if only we have the courage to open our hearts and minds to it. Maybe you'll never encounter a freezing bear at your doorstep, but I guarantee there will be moments in your life that demand the same level of courage, compassion, and trust. When those moments come, remember the bears. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door to others, to nature, to yourself. Because in doing so, you might just discover that the world is bigger, kinder, and more beautiful than you ever imagined.